All right, let's bring in the jury. The record will show the presence of the jury, the defendant, and all counsel. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Did any of you see or hear anything about this case in the media in the past week? I see no hands. Did anyone attempt to discuss this case with you during the past week or at any time? I see no hands. Ms. Arias, you are still under oath. Do you understand?
Yes.
Mr. Martinez, you may continue with cross-examination.
Ma'am, you have a problem with the truth, telling the truth, don't you?
Objection, argumentative.
Overruled. Not typically.
Well, when it's to your benefit, you will lie, right?
Objection, argumentative.
Sustained.
Ma'am, do you remember having a conversation with Detective Flores of the Mesa Police Department back on July 15th of 2008?
Yes.
And this was the day that you were arrested, right?
Yes.
And during that time, you told him something, and let's take a look at it right now. This is Exhibit 378.
It's at night and you go to
Oops,
sleep.
hold on, I'm sorry.
Objection, Your Honor.
Oh,
We approach.
You may. Ladies and gentlemen, you should disregard what you just saw on the screen. You may continue.
Ma'am, this is Exhibit 348.
A lot of details on this case that haven't been released to the public and not even to Travis's family. And those details are known only by us and the person who did it. Okay, and that's one of the reasons I'm here, is because I believe that you know some of these details. And I think you can help us.
I would love to help you in any way that I can.
Okay.
Did you hear yourself telling the detective that you would help them in any way that you could?
Yes.
That's not true, is it?
I don't know. I guess it depends on what help means.
Yes or no? Were you there to help him?
I don't know.
Were you there to tell the truth?
No.
That wasn't the truth, was it? That you were there to help him, was it?
No, that was not the truth.
And in fact, you were there for a different purpose. You were there so that he wouldn't get the truth, right?
No, I was there against my will.
You were there against your will. You didn't have to talk to him, did you?
In hindsight, I
Ma'am,
realized
yes
I
or
didn't
no?
have to.
Did you have to talk to him? I'm not asking you about hindsight. Isn't it true that you could have chosen not to talk to him, right?
I could have, I think.
And well, you keep saying, I think.
At the time, I didn't know
Ma'am,
that.
I'm asking you. You keep saying, I think. Isn't it true that you had an opportunity to stop talking to him, but you chose to talk to him? Yes or no?
That's true.
And during that time, you told him certain things, right?
Yes.
And in fact, when you spoke to the detective, one of the things that you told him was that you were never there, right?
Yes.
And by there, I mean at the crime scene, right?
Yes.
And you told us previously, well, the reason that I lied to him was because I was ashamed. Do you remember telling us that?
Yes.
Just because you're ashamed, that gives you the right to lie?
Objection, argumentative.
Sustained.
Well, ma'am, the fact that you were ashamed, do you think that justifies what you did?
Objection, argumentative.
Overruled. No.
And do you think, the other thing that you said, well, you know, I knew it was going to happen, but I was trying to postpone the inevitable. Is that what you were doing when you were lying?
No, because the inevitable had occurred.
Pardon?
The inevitable had already occurred.
The inevitable to you was being arrested then, right?
Yes.
So if being arrested had already occurred, then why didn't you tell the truth?
I was ashamed.
So, which is what you told us before, right?
Before when?
Today. Isn't that the word that we just talked about? You were ashamed?
Yes.
So are you having problems remembering what you said a couple minutes ago?
No.
So you were ashamed. What could you possibly be ashamed of other than that you killed Travis Alexander, right?
That was the biggest part of the shame.
Oh, so there were other things that you were ashamed of more than killing Mr. Alexander then?
Yes.
Objection, mischaracterizes the testimony.
Overruled.
Yes?
Yes.
And one of the other things that you were, well, and the reason that you were ashamed of killing Mr. Alexander is because that was going to have some repercussions for you, wasn't there?
Part of the reason, yes.
Again, part of the reason. The other reason was that you were feeling scared, right?
That's part of the reason too.
So if you feel scared, you believe then it's okay to lie.
No, that's not true.
Well, that's what you did though, right?
Yes, it is.
So that's no excuse then, right?
No, it isn't.
And in fact, there's nothing that the detective ever did to get you to say whatever it was that you said at the first interview, right?
Not that I recall.
Well, again, we're with the memory issue. Ma'am, are you having problems remembering what happened back on July 15th of 2008?
No,
So he didn't do anything then, right?
I can't think of any examples.
Right, because he didn't do anything, right?
Anything what?
What are we talking about, ma'am? Are you again having problems understanding what's going on?
Your Honor, if she can't understand his questions, that's,
Overruled, you may answer.
I don't understand his question.
Ma'am, the detective didn't do anything during the interview to cause you to lie, right?
No,
And the detective admonished you or gave you your Miranda warnings, didn't he?
yes,
And he sat and he talked to you, right?
yes,
And one of the other things that you told him was that, well, you were told us here in court was that the reason that you lied was because you were thinking about your family, right?
that was one of the reasons.
That's one of the reasons that you told us, right?
Yes,
How is it that, so then what you're telling us, if there's a good reason for it, it's okay to lie?
that's not what I'm telling anyone.
Well, you were saying you were thinking about your family, right?
I did say that.
And that's a good reason or an excuse for you to lie then, right?
No, I didn't say that.
Well, that's the way you try to, didn't you tell us on direct examination that the reason that you lied was because you were thinking in part about your family? Yes or no?
Yes, I said that.
And so then the way you were conveying it to us was that it was okay. That's a good excuse to lie.
If I conveyed it that way, I didn't mean to.
Well, because you still have a family, right?
Yes,
So, but you did say that you were concerned about your family, right?
yes, I did.
You were concerned about your reputation, right?
Yes, I was.
And so you were thinking more of yourself when you made this statement to this detective, right?
I'm not sure about that.
Well, other than you, who would be sure about your statement?
God?
Well, God's not here. We can't subpoena him, right?
I don't think so.
You don't think so? Are you sure that we can't? Because it seems like you're leaving the door open for that.
objection, relevance, Your Honor.
With regard to this issue of this interview, it was for, when you lied, it was to benefit you, right?
It was not for my benefit.
Well, it wasn't hurting you when you were lying, was it? If he would have believed your lie, it would have helped you, right?
It was hurting me to lie.
Pardon?
It was hurting me to lie.
It was very what?
It was hurting me to lie.
So in other words, you're saying that when you're talking to this detective, it was hurting your case to lie?
Yes.
You didn't know that at that time, did you?
No.
You took a chance by lying, didn't you?
I wouldn't call it that.
Well, yes, you did take a chance because you were hoping.
Objection, argumentative.
I don't have a question on it.
Finish your question.
You were hoping, ma'am, that he would believe what you were saying so that you could then walk out of that jail, right?
No, that's not right.
What other reason would you have to lie other than that it would benefit you?
I assumed that though that video would become public one day and I didn't want my family to see me admitting to something like that.
So, but you admitted it now.
Yes.
Your family's here, right?
Yes.
There are cameras everywhere, right?
Yes.
What has changed other than geography?
Time.
Time has changed. Oh, so a lie back then can be morphed into the truth now because time has changed, right?
Nothing has been morphed.
Well, you're saying that time has made the change that allows you to say something here, right? That you didn't say before.
An internal change, yes.
So you were saying that back then you were geared to lie.
No.
Well, that's what you said. There's been an internal change, right?
Yes.
And so this internal change, before that internal change, back on July 15th of 2008. That was part of the reason why you lied, this internal issue or problem, whatever it was, right?
Yes, I had a problem.
And that problem allowed you to lie, right?
I don't know how to answer that.
Why don't you know how to answer it? You're the one that brought this up about your internal problem.
Objection, asked and answered, argumentative.
Restate your question.
This internal issue that you had, that made it, in your mind, okay for you to lie back on July 15th of 2008, right?
I didn't consider it okay.
Well, you didn't consider it bad, did you?
I did.
Well, you kept doing it over and over throughout the whole interview, didn't you?
Yes.
And at no time did you stop the interview and say to yourself, this is not the thing to do, right?
I did.
You did tell him something different during that interview?
No, you said say to yourself, not him.
So, but when you're talking to yourself, no one can hear you, right?
Yes.
And
Unless
it's really
I'm talking
hard
out
for
loud.
people to corroborate what you're thinking if we don't know what you say, right?
Yes.
So we have to take your word that that's what you were thinking internally, right?
Yes. But it
Yes
crossed
or
my
no?
mind.
Yes or no?
I said yes.
And so with this interview, you then started to talk about whether or not you had been in Arizona, right?
Yes.
You said no, you hadn't been in Arizona, right?
That's right.
That's an absolute lie, right?
Yes.
And the reason that you didn't want to admit to being in Arizona is because you knew that you had killed Travis Alexander, right?
Yes.
You didn't tell that to the detective, right?
That's right.
And additionally, during that whole interview, you gave excuse after excuse as to why you weren't the person that had done this, right?
Yes.
So, safe to say that the whole interview was a lie, right?
Not the whole interview, but anything regarding my presence there on June 4th, yes.
Anything having to do with responsibility in this crime was a lie, correct?
Yes.
And the reason you did that was because it was to your benefit, right?
Objection, asked and answered, Mr.
Overruled.
Testimony.
That's not the reason I did it.
Well, it didn't hurt you, did it, back then? In the moment, it didn't hurt you, did it?
It did.
How did it hurt you in the moment if you had already been charged? It didn't change anything.
What do you mean?
In the moment, at that time, how could it possibly have hurt you since you'd already been charged? It didn't change anything, did it?
It did change things to lie.
Well, it didn't change where you were staying, did it?
No.
It didn't change the fact that you were still charged, right?
That's right.
It didn't change anything, the fact that you lied at that point, right?
That's not right.
What did it change, ma'am? Tell me what it changed on that day.
It probably changed my whole future.
I'm not asking about your future. I'm asking what it changed on that day.
Objection, she's answering his question.
Sustained.
Ma'am, the other, you had time to think
Your
about.
Honor, she should be able to give the time to answer.
Answer what? There's no question before.
Yeah, there was.
I think she answered the question. Let me continue.
Ma'am, after that interview, you then had another chance to have a conversation with Detective Flores the next day, right?
Yes.
And again, it was a voluntary conversation, wasn't it?
Yes.
And it was the same situation as the day before, right? He sat down, he asked you questions, right?
Yes.
On the previous day, he really hadn't given you too much information about the crime, right?
Not too much.
No. And it was actually during the second interview that he started to give you some information, right?
Yes.
And in fact, he showed you some photographs, right?
I think that was the 16th, yes.
Excuse me?
I think that was on the 16th.
Why don't you just pull the microphone a little bit closer? So you think that it was on the 16th when he provided you more information, right?
Yes, if I remember correctly.
And one of the things that you said was that somehow you weren't very sophisticated in dealing with law enforcement. You told us that during direct examination, right?
That's correct.
And just because you're not sophisticated or haven't dealt with law enforcement in the past Do you think that that gives you an excuse to lie?
No.
But you did it anyway, right?
Yes, I did.
And you told us that, yes, you were unsophisticated with law enforcement, right?
Yes.
So then what difference does it make if you're unsophisticated with law enforcement in terms of telling the truth or a lie?
I don't know.
But you brought it up on direct examination, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
And you did it because you wanted people to feel sorry for you, right?
No.
Objection, argument.
Overruled.
No.
But it didn't have anything to do with the conversation that you had with Detective Flores, did it?
What?
That you were unsophisticated.
I don't understand.
He asked you questions, ma'am, and you gave him answers on July 16th of 2008, right?
That's right.
The fact that you may not have dealt with another police officer before didn't change the fact that he was asking you questions and you were answering, right?
Yes.
It didn't change the fact that he was speaking English to you, right?
That's right.
And you understood what he was asking, right?
Mostly yes.
Are you saying that you didn't understand what Detective Flores was asking you during that interview?
That's not what I'm saying.
Well, I'm asking you whether or not you understood what he was asking you if he was speaking English.
I understood the English words, sometimes not the meaning of the question.
Oh, so you're going behind the meaning of the question to say that maybe you didn't understand his motive for the question, right?
I'm not sure if I was considering his motive.
Well, you said that you're not sure about whether or not you understood the question because of what was behind the question, right?
His meaning, yes.
His meaning. Well, his meaning can be expressed through his words, right?
Yes.
He was asking you certain things, and then you were answering whatever it was that you wanted to answer, right?
Yes.
And you chose to change your story from the day before, right?
Yes.
And you chose to change the story was because it benefited you, right?
No.
Well, there's a reason that you changed your story, right?
Yes.
Because the story the day before didn't work, right?
I don't know.
Well, you were still in jail, right?
Yes.
And nothing had changed, right?
Not that I remember.
Well, again, I ask you, do you have problems with your memory about any events? It seems like you keep telling me that you have problems with your memory. Do you have problems with your memory?
Occasionally.
You didn't seem to have any problems on direct examination when you were talking to us about all the sexual exploits with Mr. Alexander, did you?
I did have problems.
You regaled us for days on end about his exploits, didn't you?
I wouldn't say regaled.
Okay, you told us about it for days on end, didn't you?
I just answered the questions I
Yes
was
or
asked.
no? You told us. When the question was posed, you told us, didn't you?
To the best of my recollection.
Is anybody saying that you didn't do it to the best of your recollection?
You're implying that?
Ma'am, isn't it true that what the prosecutor's implying is that you knew too much during the direct examination? If we're talking about implications,
Well, then that would be false.
well, isn't it true that you had a great memory when you were on direct examination with regard to issues involving Mr. Alexander's sexual exploits?
Objection, argument, you asked and answered.
Sustained, rephrase.
You told us a lot about you and Mr. Alexander's sexual dalliances, right?
Yes.
And you were able to give us dates, right?
Usually.
Well, a lot of the times you were able to give us dates, right?
Yes.
You were able to tell us what happened, right?
Usually.
Well, a lot of the time. For example, the first time that, according to you, you had oral sex, you were able to tell us when that was, right?
Yes.
You were able to tell us how it happened, right?
Yes.
You were able to tell us where it was, right?
Yes.
And that was before July 16th of 2008, wasn't it?
Yes.
That was in November of 2006, right?
No.
When was it then?
A week after we met, September
So when was that?
2006.
It was in 2006, and so a week after you met what, in June what?
Early September 2006.
So you do have a good memory, right? You just showed me that you'd have a good memory for events that occurred before July 16th of 2008, right?
I reviewed those things, so I memorized them.
Oh, so you actually sat down and you memorized it. How is it that you what did you memorize it from?
Date and timestamps.
I know, but what did you memorize it from, ma'am? Are you
Photographs.
talking that you sat down with a police report and then you memorized it?
No, they were photographs.
Pardon?
They were photos.
Family photos?
Photos.
Photographs. So you looked at some photographs then, right?
Yes.
Oh, so there were photographs of the first time that you had oral intercourse with Mr. Alexander?
No.
Well, then what is it that you reviewed that gives you this knowledge?
Photographs of the convention in Las Vegas 2006 that were date and time stamped.
So it was in July of 2006, is this when this happened, right?
September.
And it was in September of 2006 that were there photographs of it?
Convention, yes.
Were there photographs at or near the time of this oral sex that you regaled us with?
I don't think so.
So but you do have an independent recollection of it, don't you?
What do you mean by that?
Do you have an independent memory of having oral intercourse with Mr. Alexander the first time it happened?
You mean, I don't know what you mean. Independent of what?
Do you have a memory of the first time you had oral intercourse with Mr. Alexander?
Yes.
So you do remember it then, right?
Yes.
And you remember where it was, right?
Yes.
So that event was before this July 16th of 2008 interview, right?
Yes.
That was further in time, right?
Yes.
You didn't seem to have too much of a memory problem with that, right?
That's right.
Did you ever review anything else with regard to the July 16th, 2008 interview?
Very briefly, it makes me sick
Is
to my
that a yes or
stomach.
no?
I guess that would be yes.
So you did review parts, at least according to you, the way you're saying it, of the interview that you had on July 16th of 2008, right?
Yes.
And you're saying that your memory of what happened on July 16th of 2008 is so clouded today that it's only based on that review?
No, that's not what I'm saying.
You do have an independent recollection of it then, right?
What do you mean by independent?
Independent means coming from inside of your head.
It's based on what I've reviewed.
So everything that you have told us then in this case is based on what you reviewed?
I'm referring to July 16th.
So everything with regard to July 16th is based on what you reviewed. You don't have any other recollection.
Not everything, but most of it.
Do you remember that you lied?
Yes.
And do you remember what you lied about?
Yes.
Sir. And do you remember that you lied about the killing of Travis Alexander, right?
Yes.
And that, you know, is a change from what you said the day before, right?
Yes.
And it was a drastic change, right?
Yes.
It was a total change because now you were there, right?
Yes.
You knew that that would be important, right?
Yes.
And in fact, what you were trying to do is because the detective had already told you about the fingerprints, didn't he?
I think he did, yes.
And he also told you about the hair that was there, correct?
Yes.
You guys talked about DNA analysis, didn't you?
Yes.
And you talked about, and he showed you the photograph with a foot in it, with your foot in it. Do you remember that?
Yes.
So after he showed, and you don't deny that that's your foot in the photograph, do you?
I don't deny it.
And after he told you that, that's when you changed your story, didn't you?
Yes.
And you changed your story to conform with the forensic evidence that he was telling you about, right?
That's right.
And that was because you wanted to make up a story that conformed with that, with what he was telling you, right?
Yes, as much as possible.
Because you did not want any consequences with regard to the killing of Travis Alexander, right?
I wasn't concerned about consequences at that point.
Ma'am, do you think it's a good excuse to lie just because this detective is giving you some forensic evidence?
No.
but it's a good reason to lie if you want to get out of whatever you are being talked about, right?
That wasn't my goal, so.
Well, was your goal to go to prison?
no. Not a physical prison on earth, no.
Well, ma'am, was your goal to, so your goal was not to go to prison then, right?
It wasn't a goal of mine, I can say.
And in fact, that was something that you were trying to avoid, right?
I don't know. I was trying to kill myself, I think.
Ma'am, you've said that many times, that you tried to kill yourself, right? In court.
I don't know that many, but I've recounted a time that I did.
You've said it more than 3, 4, 5 times, right?
Perhaps.
And in fact, one of the things that you told us about was that, well, when you were in the Maricopa County Jail, that you tried to kill yourself, right?
No, Siskiyou County Jail.
Siskiyou County Jail. So you do remember that. And that when you tried to do that, you took some Advil. Do you remember telling us about that?
Yes.
And that what you did then is you took a razor, right?
Yes.
And that you cut yourself, right?
It was a nick.
It was a nick. And because it stung so much, that you said, nah, this is not the way for me to go, right?
I didn't say that.
You said it stung and that's why you stopped. Isn't that what your direct testimony was?
That night, yes.
Right. And that's the night that I'm talking to you about, right?
Yes.
I'm not talking to you about any other night, am I?
It sounded like you were.
No. Just to be clear, I'm not talking about any other night, am I? Do you understand that?
Okay, I understand that.
And you nicked yourself and it hurt, right?
Yes.
And I think the word that you used, stung, right?
Yes.
To use your standard, ma'am, of how you stopped because it stung. Can you imagine how much it must have hurt Mr. Alexander when you stuck that knife right into his chest? That really must have hurt, right?
Argumentative.
Sustained. You may continue.
You also told a story, right? To the
Yes.
detective, right?
Yes.
And your story was that it was 2 individuals that came in, right?
Yes.
And one individual was a male, right?
Yes.
And another one was a female, right?
Yes.
And you know that the police are going to follow up on that, right?
No, I didn't know that.
Do you think that police don't investigate crimes, that if somebody provides them a lead, do you think that they don't go out and try to find out if it's true or not?
Objection as to relevance.
Did you consider the consequences of your lie?
No.
No, because it was all about you, right?
Objection argumentative.
Didn't consider the consequences, but yet you went even further than saying that it was 2 people, right? You said other things, right?
Yes.
And that was totally different than what you had said the day before, right?
Yes.
And what you said was that these people, you were taking a photograph, right?
Yes.
You never mentioned anything about dropping a camera, did you?
No.
And you never mentioned anything about running down the hallway or anything like that, did you?
No.
And what you did say is that you were down, somebody hit you on the head, right?
Yes.
That you heard a pop, right?
Yes.
And that while this was going on, you heard Mr. Alexander moaning or uttering some words, right?
Screaming.
Screaming. And you heard him screaming to go, you said that he was screaming to go to the neighbors, right?
Yes.
And at some point you said that you saw Mr. Alexander on all 4s, right?
Yes.
And he couldn't move his feet or feel his legs, right?
I said that he said that.
Pardon?
I said that he said that.
But he wasn't moving, was he?
He was.
According to your story, he wasn't moving, was he?
I don't remember. He was lethargic, is what I think I said. He said. I said that he said.
You weren't able to get him out of there, according to your story, right?
That's correct.
But you were able, at some point, according to you, get out of there, right?
Yes.
And that's what you told the detective, right?
Yes.
And the reason you told the detective this lie was because you didn't want to be charged in this case, didn't you?
That's not the reason.
Was the reason that you told him that because you did want to be charged in this case?
What did you say?
I said, was the reason that you told him that because you did want to be charged in this case?
Because I did.
Yes, you said you didn't. Ma'am, didn't you just tell me that the reason you told him that was not because you didn't want to be charged? That's what you just said, right?
That wasn't the reason I told him that. That's correct.
Well, you didn't tell him the story just so you could be charged, right?
That's also correct.
So, you told him a story for a reason, right?
Yes,
Is it the embarrassment factor now?
that was part of it.
And so it's more important to you about your feelings of embarrassment than to tell the truth.
You say that as present tense. That's not correct.
I'm talking about back on July 16th of 2008. Your feelings of embarrassment were more important than telling the truth, right?
I didn't really weigh importance.
Well, you said that one of the reasons that you didn't tell the truth was because of embarrassment, right?
I think shame would be more correct.
All right, let's go with the word shame then. Because of you were thinking of shame back then, that's why you didn't tell him the truth, right?
That's just part of the reason. The
Part
bigger
of it.
part.
And that shame is what, on you?
Yes.
And you are ashamed because you killed him? Is that what it is?
I was definitely ashamed of that and other things.
But you were also ashamed that it would get out that you were the person that did it, right?
Certainly.
And so, to you, the fact that your feelings, in this case being ashamed, are so strong back then that that was an excuse, a good excuse for your lie, right?
It wasn't the sole deciding factor, but it was a big reason.
It was a big reason, but my question is much more direct than that. My question is, this feeling ashamed was more important to you then than telling the truth.
I wouldn't say important, but it felt stronger.
All right, to use your phrase, your feeling of being ashamed was strong back then to the point that it overrode your telling the truth, right?
That's right.
But that's no excuse, is it?
No.
Nothing that you might have been feeling at that time was an excuse to lie, right?
That's right.
But you still chose to do it, right?
Yes.
Because it would have benefited you, whether it was because you felt ashamed or because you didn't want to tell about it, right?
I wasn't thinking of benefits.
What's that?
I was not thinking of benefits.
Well, you weren't thinking of telling the truth, were you?
I was thinking about it.
But you didn't do it.
No, I didn't.
And there were this factor of being ashamed. What other factors did you consider, ma'am?
I considered if I told the truth, then I would have to explain why. And if I had to explain why, then I would have to go back through our whole history, back to things that he was very ashamed of, that I was ashamed of, that I just didn't want to get out.
But didn't you just, in this trial, haven't you through 8 days tell us all of that stuff?
Yeah, I think it was 9 days.
Okay, 9 days. You have a good memory. For 9 days, you told us all of that stuff, didn't you?
Yeah, it wasn't based on my memory. Someone told me 9 days.
What? What do you mean? What did you just say? Somebody told you what?
You said I had a good memory because I corrected you, but it wasn't based on my memory. Someone had said I was on the stand for 9 days, so that's why I said 9.
So it isn't on. So what you're testifying to isn't necessarily what you know. Then is what you're telling us, right?
It's what I believe.
Well, you just said that it's what somebody told you, right?
Yes.
So, are you testifying based on what something somebody told you instead of what you know?
In that case, yeah.
Well, no, not in that case. I'm talking about what you're telling us here today. Are you telling us these things because you know them or because somebody told you?
The things I'm saying right now are because I know them.
Except for the number of days you were on the witness stand, right? That one, somebody told you that one.
Someone told me that one, and it sounded accurate.
And then, so you used that to correct the prosecutor, right? Even though you didn't
correct.
remember.
Yes.
With regard to that day, you said that all of this stuff, information, whatever you want to call it, was out there and you didn't want it to come out, right?
It wasn't out there. I didn't want it to be out there.
So what you're saying is, I guess, is that you were being a good Samaritan, right? In lying.
I wouldn't say that.
Faint.
Well, you were saying that you didn't want this stuff to come out about Mr. Alexander and your relationship with him, right?
That's right.
So you were being a good person, right?
Objection, argumentative.
Sustained.
Well, do you think that that's an excuse that to not tell the truth? That you wanted to hide information?
No.
So you did hide information in addition to lying, right?
Yes.
But the detective isn't the only person that you lied to, right?
That's right.
You lied to a lot of people, right?
Everyone.
And there's different reasons that you had for lying to everyone, right?
Yes.
And in fact, one of the people that you lied to was Ryan Burns, right?
Yes.
Ryan Burns is this individual that you had a romantic interest in, right?
Yes.
In fact, in order to see whether or not the spark was there, you went all the way to Utah, right?
That was my goal.
Well, it was your goal, but you made it there, right?
Yes, but not for the reason you stated.
So you weren't there to go see him to see if there was any romantic interest?
Not on June 5th.
Not on June 5th, when you started your trip, part of your trip. So you're saying then that he was an afterthought?
Yeah, he was.
So he was just an alibi then?
Yeah, well, no, not an alibi.
Well, if he's an afterthought, then if he's an afterthought, that means the primary thought that you had when you left Wairika back on June 2nd was to see Travis Alexander then. If Mr. Burns was an afterthought, as you say.
That's not correct.
Well, that's what you said though, right?
No, that's what you
was
said.
Mr. Burns was an afterthought, right?
No, he was an afterthought after June 4th.
Okay, so before that he was a priority thought.
He was the reason for the trip.
So he was the reason for the trip then, right?
Yes.
And the reason for the trip to go see him was to see whether or not there was a romantic interest, right?
That's why I planned the trip.
Right. That's my question. You wanted to see if there was going to be any sparks between you and Mr. Burns, right?
Yes.
And you had not seen him before that date in the sense that you hadn't been with him alone, correct?
That's correct.
You hadn't been out on a date with him before, right?
That's right.
You had only done the text messaging, right?
And phone calls and
Well,
emails.
is that a yes or a no, text messaging?
That would be yes.
And with regard to the telephone calls, you had done that, right?
Yes.
And you'd done that instant messaging thing, right?
I can't remember if that was before or after June 4th.
Well, but you did do that with him though, right?
Yes.
Do you remember sending him an instant message saying something to the effect, this is a test, before you went out to see him? Remember seeing that?
I remember seeing this as a test, but I don't recall the date.
And because of this interaction, you decided to go see him, right?
Yes.
And when you got there, one of the things that you said was that, well, I needed to keep up the facade, right?
That's right.
So you lied about getting lost, right?
Yes.
You didn't get lost that day, right?
I did get lost.
Oh, so you did get lost. So it was true then. This trip to see Mr. Alexander, it was because you got lost.
That's not why.
Well, where did you get, if you could tell us, because you were lost, where did you get lost, ma'am?
My understanding is it was somewhere in Arizona.
Not your understanding. I want you to tell me where you got lost, not what somebody else may have told you.
Objection, Your Honor, she should be allowed to answer the question.
Overruled. Answer the question.
My understanding is that I was
Ma'am,
lost somewhere in Arizona.
you're not being responsive. I'm asking you to tell me where you drove physically to the point where you got lost. Where did it start that you got, where does the beginning of your getting lost start?
Again, I'm going to object, Your Honor. She asked the question. She was in the middle of answering and he interrupted. She should be allowed to answer his
All right,
question.
overruled to change the question. Restate the question.
Ma'am, when was the first time you realized you were lost?
When I couldn't power on my phone, it was dark.
Was this before or after you killed Mr. Alexander?
After.
And this is where you pulled off the side of the road, right?
Yes.
And then you continued to drive from that point to see Mr. Burns, right?
I just drove at that
I
point.
understand that you say you just drove, but from that point on, you did get a chance to speak to Mr. Burns, right?
Yes.
And in fact, one of the first person that you actually called once you got your phone charged was Matt McCartney, right?
Yes.
And he's somebody that you are very close to, right?
Somewhat, yes.
He's a very good friend, right?
Yes.
He's an ally, right?
I don't know what you mean by ally.
Someone who will not betray you.
No, he's betrayed me.
So, and you're talking about the fact that he saw somebody else, right? When he was with you, right? Is that what you're talking about, the betrayal?
That's only one of the times he's betrayed me.
So you've never told somebody, for example, like 48 hours, that he was somebody that will not betray you.
I did say that on 48 hours.
So which is it? Is he going to betray you or is he not going to betray you? What is it?
Well, hopefully not.
Well, hopefully not means you're not answering the question. You just told us that he did betray you, yet now you're saying that in an interview with 48 hours, you said he would not betray you. So which is it?
I'm going to object to the relevance of any of this.
Well, when I made that statement to 48 hours, it was my belief that he would not.
It was your way of what?
My belief that he would not betray me.
With regard to any issues that were presented at the time that you made the telephone call to him after you killed Mr. Alexander, right?
With regard to that, when I said that in September versus
Right.
June.
With regard to the call, if you told him anything, he wouldn't betray you, right?
That's what I said in September 2008.
And that's what you believed in September of 2008, right?
In September 2008, yes.
So you're out there and you try to call Mr. McCartney, and so you say that you're lost, but one of the other things that you say that you do is that you get out of the car, right?
Yes.
And you clean up, right?
Yes.
That's because you knew what you had done, right?
I don't remember thinking that.
Well, I'm not asking you whether or not you remember thinking that. Isn't that the reason why you did it?
No. I don't think so.
Well, you knew that you had killed Mr. Alexander at that point, right?
It's hard to describe.
Yes or no? It's a yes or no sort of situation then.
It's not really. It's
It
something.
is.
It's not.
So in your mind, back then, when you're on the side of the road, you don't know if you killed him, right? That's what you're saying.
I can't really say it wasn't in my mind. Like, it was kind of not there. It's kind of
You
weird.
weren't there, right? What you're saying is you weren't there, right? That's what you just said, right? That you weren't there. That's what you just said, right?
Weren't there
And
in my
so-
head.
And so if you weren't there, though, you were there enough to pick up the phone and call Matthew McCartney, right? You were
Yes.
there enough for that, right?
Yes.
You were there enough to call Ryan Burns, right?
After a while, yes.
You were there enough for that, and you were there enough to make a call to Travis Alexander, weren't you?
Yes.
So you were there for those purposes, but you weren't there to tell me about what you were thinking, though, right? Is that what you're saying?
It depends on the time period.
How about the time when you got out and you started to wash your hands?
By then, I wasn't thinking that. I just knew something awful had happened because I had blood on my hands and my feet.
And so you knew that those were for Mr. Alexander, didn't you?
I think I did, yes.
You think you did, but again, you're telling us you're not sure, right?
I'm not telling you that.
Well, you had blood on your hands, right?
That's right.
And you had been driving, right?
Yes.
According to you, you had been at Mr. Alexander's house, right?
Yes.
There had been a fight, right?
Yes.
And you had done something, right?
Yes.
And this doing something had caused Mr. Alexander to bleed, right?
Yes.
And so if that's the case and you have blood on your hands, wouldn't you think that the blood came from Mr. Alexander?
I had cuts too, so.
So you're thinking that the cuts could have come from you stabbing him?
I didn't have any recall of stabbing him at that
Well
point
then,
in time.
so you don't have any idea where your cuts come from then, at that point?
No, I had cut myself on June 4th, early in the morning before we went to bed.
So you cut yourself on the glass, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Is this the situation where you're saying that you cut yourself on your right hand, right?
Yes.
You're left-handed, right?
I'm both.
Do you know who you're ambidextrous, is that what you're saying?
Yes, depending on the activity.
Well, do you remember indicating to 48 Hours that you're a lefty?
Yes.
So what is it? Are you left or right?
Depends on the activity.
And what activity do you write left-handed?
I write with both, but I'm more proficient with my left.
And so with regard to this being out there, so you're out there and you've made these calls, you've got out, and you find your charger, right? Is that when you find the charger?
When I pulled over, yes.
And at some point you're able to make a telephone call to Mr. Burns, right?
Yes.
And then starts the lying to him, right?
Yes.
And so at some point then you drive all the way up to see him, and you get there around 11 o'clock in the morning, right?
I think so, yes.
Well, in between 11 and noon, would that be accurate?
I believe it was before noon.
And after 11, right?
I think so. I wasn't paying attention at the time, but it was late morning.
Right? And you go up there, you have this meeting, and when you go up there to see him, you're telling us that you still don't know if Mr. Alexander is dead, right? That's what you're telling us, right?
That's not what I'm saying.
Well, so you do know that he's dead then?
I have a, it's like I wasn't accepting it or looking at it in my mind.
Acceptance and knowing are two different things. Wouldn't you agree, ma'am?
I was in a strong state of denial.
Ma'am, that's not my question to you. My question is accepting and knowing are two different things. Don't you agree?
Yes. I
And
agree.
so what you're saying is that you weren't accepting it. What that means is that you knew it. You just didn't want to deal with it. That's what you're saying, right?
I don't know how to answer that.
Well, you're the one that talked about acceptance, right? You just said that right now, correct?
That's correct.
And so by acceptance, it means you don't want to deal with it, right?
I don't know.
Well, you're the one that used that word. Why wouldn't you know?
Objection, asked and answered.
Overruled.
I don't know. My mind wasn't right during that whole period.
Well, you're throwing up your hands and you're saying that your mind wasn't right, but that's not the issue. The issue here is whether or not you knew he was dead, and it appears, correct me if I'm wrong, that you're saying you did know that he was dead.
I believe that I knew he was dead.
Okay, so you knew he was dead. And when you went to see Mr. Burns, you were the same person that you had been before. You were happy, smiling, right?
I was not, but I was trying to portray that.
Yeah. You were trying to portray that to lie to him, right? Put up a facade, right?
Yes, him and all my friends.
Pardon?
Him and all my friends.
I'm asking about Mr. Burns, all right? With regard to Mr. Burns, you were trying to put up a facade for him, right?
That's right.
You wanted to pretend that you were happy, right?
Yes.
And the reason that you wanted to pretend that you were happy is because you wanted to see if there was any spark with Mr. Burns, right?
That was the furthest thing from my mind at that point.
Okay, so if that's the furthest thing from your mind, then the closest thing in your mind is the fact that you killed Mr. Alexander, right?
I wasn't thinking of it in those terms.
Well, but isn't that sort of what you're telling us now?
It was something to that effect.
And so you go on through the day, and there's this meeting that takes place with Mr. Burns and one of his associates at a restaurant, right?
Yes,
and you follow along, and then after that, after the meeting, you go back to Mr. Burns's place, right?
yes,
And now it's the afternoon, right?
yes,
And during the afternoon, when you're with Mr. Burns, you begin to kiss him, right?
yes,
And that's because you want to put up a facade, right?
I guess that's part of the reason.
Well, no, you said when you were on direct that that was the reason you wanted to put up a facade, right?
Objection, mischaracterizes her testimony.
Restate the question.
Ma'am, with regard to Mr. Burns and kissing him, was the reason that you kissed him because you wanted to put up a facade?
That was one of the reasons.
All right, and the other reason was that you wanted to see if there was a spark between the two of you, right?
Objection, asked and answered.
Overruled.
That's not right.
But you did kiss him though, right?
Yes, I did.
Knowing that Mr. Alexander was dead, right?
I guess so.
Well, no, we don't want you to guess. We want you to know. And if you don't know, you can tell me that. Did you just tell me previously that you knew that Mr. Alexander was dead?
It's hard to explain.
Ma'am, what is hard to explain about a person breathing or not breathing? What is so difficult? Why is that a difficult concept for you?
Because I'd never killed anyone before.
Okay, so because you've never killed anyone before, then you're having a problem deciding whether or not the person is dead, right?
I'm having a hard time describing what my state of mind was during that time.
If you hadn't killed anybody before, and you didn't know if he was dead, then why did you just leave him to die?
Objection, Mr. Relevance.
Overruled.
I don't think I did that.
Well, sure, you just told us that you'd never killed anybody before and you didn't know. So what you're telling us is that you left them to die, didn't you?
I don't believe that.
Okay, so then you did know he was dead. Can't have it both ways. Which one is it?
Objection, Your Honor. Argument, if she's already explained her state of mind. She's not a psychologist.
Sustained as to the question. Rephrase.
At the time you were kissing Mr. Burns' lips, did you know he was dead, yes or no? And by he, I mean Mr. Alexander.
Objection, asked and answered, Judge.
Overruled.
I think I did.
Okay? And so, but yet you continue kissing Mr. Burns anyway, right?
I don't know.
You mean you don't remember him, that you guys were continually making out? Or not continually, but were making out before you went out for the evening?
I don't remember making out with him before we went out for the evening.
But you were kissing him, whatever that means, right?
We kissed.
Then you went to this training that was in the evening, correct?
It wasn't a training, it was a business briefing.
It was a briefing in the evening, right?
Yes.
And it was at a college, I believe, correct?
I don't remember.
And is that when you drove with Leslie Udy or not?
I don't remember. I think I might have followed Ryan to the place where the meeting was.
And when you went to this place, that's where you met up with Leslie Udy, right?
Yes.
And then after that, there was a meeting where you guys went to Chili's, right?
I'm not sure what restaurant it was.
All right, so you went to a restaurant, correct?
That's correct.
And when you went to this restaurant, before you went in, you were talking to Leslie Udy, right? In the car.
It was either before we went in or after, but at one point we were in the parking lot discussing things.
And you talked to her for about an hour, right?
I don't remember how long.
It was not 5 minutes, it was longer than 5 minutes,
It
right?
was longer than 5 minutes.
And during that time, that's when you told her that you looked forward to the future when your kids, those that you were going to have, and Mr. Alexander's kids could play together at PPL meetings, right?
Yes.
That was a lie. wasn't it?
Objection, Your Honor. The question is what she was hoping. It's not a definitive fact.
Overruled.
Can you please restate the question?
You lied to Leslie Udy when you told her that it was your hope that your kids and Mr. Alexander's kids played together at PPL events.
No, that was a hope of mine.
Pardon?
That was a hope of mine.
Oh, so you're saying that you thought he was alive at that time then, for you to have that hope?
That's not what I'm saying.
Well, if you're saying that, and you know he's dead, why are you lying to her?
I had that hope.
How can you say, as you sit here today, ma'am, that that was your hope when you knew he was dead? You can't have it both ways.
Objection, Your Honor. This characterizes her testimony.
Overruled.
It was a hope of mine. And the fact that he had died didn't change my hope. It just made that hope unrealistic.
Oh, so the way you're saying now is the way you phrased it to her was that you hoped that your kids could play with his kids, not that that's what you wanted. Is that what you're saying now?
Objection. This characterizes her testimony again.
Overruled. You may have.
That's not what was said, actually.
Well, if you don't know what was said, then why are you telling me that you said hope? That you hoped?
I didn't say I don't know what was said.
Pardon?
I didn't say I don't know what was said.
Well, did you use the word hope?
I might have used the word hope.
And if that's the case, if you used the word hope, then what you're telling us is that that was your hope even though he was dead, right?
That was a hope of mine.
Don't you think that that's a lie, knowing what you knew at the time?
No, because I'm just stating a wish that I had.
Oh, so that was your wish even though you had killed him.
Yes, it was my wish.
And the other thing that you told her was that you and he were great friends, right?
Yes.
And you never mentioned anything about what happened at his house, did you?
That's right.
That was omitting important information, wasn't it?
Yes.
Ma'am, do you know somebody by the name of Mark Udy?
Yes.
He was there that night at that restaurant, wasn't he?
I believe he was.
And in fact, he sat next to you, didn't he?
I think so, yes.
So it's your testimony that you did not, knowing that he was there that night, so is it your testimony that you did not have any cuts to your left hand?
I had cuts on my right hand for sure, and I don't remember about my left.
So it could be then that you did have cuts on your left hand, right? Correct?
It could be, but I didn't have Band-Aids on my left hand.
I'm not asking you about Band-Aids. Maybe that's the problem here. I'm asking whether or not you had cuts on your left hand.
I don't recall. I remember my right hand was cut.
So, but it could be that you did, right?
Possibly.
And Mr. Udy was sitting right next to you, right?
Yes.
And because you were eating, he was in a position to see your hands, right?
Objection. Speculation.
Overruled.
I would think so.
Pardon?
I would think so.
Right, because your hands were above the table, right?
Yes.
You know whether or not you had gauze on your cuts.
No, they were Band-Aids.
So you're saying you had Band-Aids on your cuts, right?
On my right hand.
Okay? But you don't remember whether or not you had any Band-Aids on your left hand, right?
I did not have Band-Aids on my left hand.
You just may have had cuts. Is that what you're saying?
If I did, I don't remember, but I guess it's possible.
Well, you keep saying that it's possible. Why would you say now that it's possible that you would have cuts on your left hand? What makes you think that you might have cuts on your left hand?
Nothing makes me think that.
Well, then why are you saying it's possible? Aren't you really telling me that you didn't have any cuts on your left hand?
Not that I remember.
Okay, not that you remember means there's the possibility that it could be, right?
That's what I'm saying.
So there is a possibility that it could be. You don't remember. So if somebody else says that there may be, you wouldn't have any reason to quibble with that.
Objection. Argumentative. Proper question.
Overruled.
I I don't know.
And you don't know because you don't remember, is that it?
I don't know because I didn't have Band-Aids on my left, I had them on my right.
Ma'am, one of the other things that happened after that is that at some point you then returned back to Mr. Burns' home, right?
Yes,
And you returned back to Mr. Burns' house, and you guys go to sleep, right?
yes,
You set your clock, or the clock is set so that you can get up, right?
yes,
You need to get back to work, right?
yes,
And you need to get back to work. Margaritaville?
no,
You never worked at Margaritaville at that time, right?
I don't know that there's any place called Margaritaville, so no,
So the answer is no, right?
that's right.
And so it's also true that if you broke a glass at work and you cut your hand, it wouldn't have been at a place called Margaritaville, right?
That's right.
Once you're there with Mr. Burns, you do wake up at some point, right?
Yes,
There's a movie that you guys were watching at some point also, correct?
yes,
And when you wake up, you became passionate with him, right? You started to kiss him, didn't you?
not passionate, yes, kissing.
You were what?
Not passionate, but yes, kissing.
And at some point, isn't it true that you quote unquote adjusted him?
I helped him adjust himself.
Okay, but if you helped him adjust himself, there was some adjusting that was going on, right?
That's right.
And that means that you moved his buttocks, is what we're talking about, right?
No,
Didn't you move his body then so that his body would be more available to yours?
no,
You didn't get on top of him and grind on top of him with your clothing on.
no.
That's not anything that you did, right?
I did not grind that guy.
You didn't, perhaps the Mormons, without getting too much into it, you and Mr. Alexander did this grinding, didn't you?
Yes,
And that means something in your relationship, doesn't it?
I don't know.
Well, you just said that you and Mr. Alexander did this, right?
Yes, I did.
And that meant that your genitalia rubbed against each other, right?
Yes,
So what you're saying is that your genitalia did not rub against Mr. Burns' genitalia, correct?
that's correct.
But you did get on top of him, right? Around the waist area.
No, I got off of him. I fell asleep on top of him.
And no, that's not what I'm asking you. I'm asking whether or not while you were kissing him, you got on top of his waist area. That's what I'm asking.
I think I was laying next to him.
You keep saying think. I want you to tell me whether or not you got on top of Mr. Burns and placed your genitalia, where it would be, I know you were clothed, on top of his. That's what I'm asking.
No, I got off from being on top of him.
So if you got off from being on top of him, at some point you had to be on top of him then, right?
Yes,
And so you were on top of his genitalia with your body. Part of
No.
your body was on top of his, right?
no, I was on top of his stomach.
Okay, and what you're saying is you were on top of his stomach with your legs spread or not?
I don't recall. We were in the love sack.
Pardon? I know you were in the love sack, but I'm asking whether or not you were straddling his stomach area.
I think I might have been.
Okay? You say you think you might have been, which means really nothing because you're not admitting to anything. Isn't it true that you were straddling his midsection?
Objection, ask and answer. It's been the
Sustained.
third time.
Sustained.
Ma'am, and during that time that you were on top of him, there was some kissing that was going on, right?
No, we were sleeping.
But as soon as you woke up, you kissed him, right?
Not as soon as I woke up.
Some point thereafter, you kissed him, right?
Before I left, yes.
So you're saying that there was no romantic kissing that went on, is what you're telling me, right?
That's not what I'm saying.
So there was romantic kissing that went on.
Yes.
When did this romantic kissing take place?
I think it started first in the afternoon and then in the evening, or I guess it would be early morning on the 5th or the 6th.
And
Before
he
I
also
left.
placed his hands between your legs, right? Some point.
Not that I recall.
But that means that you were here when he testified, right?
Yes.
So it could be that he did place his hands between your legs, right?
No, could be that he was full of crap. He didn't go there.
So you are saying that Mr. Burns is full of crap,
When he said he got near my vaginal area, absolutely.
right? So, and you're the same person that's telling us that he's full of crap that has lied to him, right?
Yes.
That has lied to Leslie Udy, right?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
That has lied to Detective Flores on 2 occasions, right?
Yes.
And to continue this litany of lies, it isn't restricted to Utah. You also lied to people in Arizona, didn't you?
Yes, everyone.
Right. And yet you're telling us somebody else is full of crap, right?
When it comes to that, yes.
So the answer is yes.
I said yes.
And so after this happened, you went back to Wairika, correct? Drove back.
Yes.
And you drove back to Wairika and you didn't tell anybody anything that had happened, right?
You mean at Travis's house?
Yes, at Travis's house.
That's correct.
One of the things that ended up happening, though, is that you then received a call on June 10th of 2008 in the early morning hours, right?
Yes.
And you received that call from an individual by the name of Daniel Freeman, didn't you?
Yes.
He's the same individual that testified here today, not today, but at some point during these proceedings, right?
Yes.
And he was telling you about Mr. Alexander, right?
Yes.
And you lied to him, right?
I don't know, I guess.
Well, no, we don't want you to guess, man. You did lie to him, didn't you?
I'm trying to recall our conversation.
Well, did you tell him I'm the person who killed him? You didn't do that, did you?
No, I didn't.
You pretended you didn't know anything about it, right?
I don't remember. He just told me.
I know what he just told you. I want to know whether or not you told him that you knew that something had happened to Mr. Alexander on June 4th of 2008. Did you tell him that?
No.
You omitted that, right?
Yes.
Even though he was calling you to talk to you about Mr. Alexander, right?
Yes.
The conversation allowed for that sort of response from you, right?
Yes.
But you didn't do it. Instead, you kept it to yourself, right?
Yes.
He was upset when he called you, right?
Objection, cause of special action.
Sustained.
Heard his voice, right?
Yes.
And you could tell from his voice whether or not he was upset. You've been around him before, hadn't you?
Yes.
You'd been around him many times going to his house for Sunday dinner, right?
Yes.
And you've also been around him when he'd been around with his family, right?
Yes.
With his sister Desiree, right?
Yes.
Had gone up to Sedona with you, right?
Yes.
Had gone up to the Grand Canyon with you, right?
Yes.
Had gone up to the Havasupai Falls, right?
Yes.
You had significant contact with him, right?
Yes.
And in fact, at some point, you even thought that he liked you, right?
Yes.
And in fact, you wrote that in your journal, right?
Yes.
So you could tell from his tone of voice that he was upset.
I've never heard him upset in my life, actually.
Okay, so that tone of voice that he displayed to you was foreign to you.
It was gentle, the way he was talking.
All right, so it was a gentle tone of voice. And in this gentle tone of voice, you never told him that you were responsible for the killing of Mr. Alexander, were you?
No, I did not.
You could have, though, right?
Yes.
He was a pretty close friend, right?
Yes.
And instead, what you chose to do is you chose to perpetuate the lie, right?
Yes.
You then started to call a religious person, didn't you?
Yes.
You called somebody by the name of Bishop Layton, right?
Yes.
And you called him and you asked him whether or not Mr. Alexander was dead, right?
I didn't think I asked him that.
Well, isn't that the topic of the conversation, Mr. Alexander's death?
Yes.
And during this time, you're calling as the grieving ex-girlfriend, right? Somebody who cares.
was calling as a friend.
Okay, if you're calling as a friend, why are you calling if you already know what happened to Mr. Alexander other than to lie about it?
There were many things I didn't know. I
Oh,
called
so you just wanted to get information about the death so you could use it later to lie about it? Is that what it is?
Objection, argumentative.
I just called because I wanted to know what he knew.
And the reason you wanted to know what he knew was so that you could see whether or not anybody was on to you, right?
Yes, partially.
And it wasn't like you cared about Mr. Alexander. It was you just wanted to see what it was that you needed to do to make sure that you weren't charged with a crime, right?
Objection, argumentative.
Sustained.
Ma'am, you wanted to see what he knew is what you told us, right?
Yes.
What purpose would there be for that information, knowing what he knows about it, other than to benefit you?
The fact that there was a big memory block was bothering me.
I'm not asking you if a memory block was bothering you.
You asked
Am
the
I?
reason. What other reason?
Am I asking you if a memory block was bothering you?
Objection, Your Honor, to ask an answer. She answered the question he asked.
Am I asking you if a memory block was bothering you?
No.
I was asking you about the information that you were trying to get and what you were going to do with it, right?
No, that's not what you were asking me.
Man, isn't it true that I asked you the purpose for calling Bishop Layton, right?
No.
I asked you that. Why did you call Bishop Layton? Didn't I ask you that?
Prior, yes.
Well, this is part of the same conversation, isn't it?
Yes.
And you do agree that you called Bishop Layton, right?
Yes.
In the middle of the night, right?
Yes.
3 a.m., I think, right?
Yeah, it was late.
And you called Bishop Layton, and you spoke to him because you wanted to get information about what he knew about the investigation, right?
That was part of it.
Yes, that part. Let's talk about that part. The part that you wanted to know about the investigation, that was going to help you should something come of this, right?
Objection, again, argumentative.
That wasn't my thought, really.
That wasn't your thought, then why do you even want to know about it?
I couldn't remember much or anything from that day.
Well, you remembered that you had been there, didn't you?
Yes.
You remembered that there had been this confrontation, right?
I do remember that.
Yes, and you remember that you didn't call 911, right?
Yes.
So why is it that you even need to know about the investigation since you have first-hand knowledge? Why are you asking for somebody who has second-hand knowledge?
Objection, Your Honor, mischaracterized. She didn't have first-hand knowledge. She had no memory.
You were there. You're the person who killed her, right? You've admitted that in court, right?
Yes.
That means you were there, right?
Yes.
If you were there, and you knew you were there, you did know you were there, though, didn't you?
Yes.
If you knew that you were there and that he was dead, then why are you calling for information? Is it to rub it in?
Objection, argumentative.
Why are you calling for
Your Honor.
Pardon? May continue.
After Bishop Layton, who did you call?
I think I called Gus Searcy at one point.
Didn't you also call Leslie Udy?
Yes.
And you called to tell her about this, right?
Yes.
And this was after you had received confirmation that he was dead, right?
I believe it was, yes.
You never told her again during this conversation about the fact that you had been there on June 4th of 2008, correct?
That's correct.
Ma'am, in addition to making statements to those people, you went out of your way to contact Mr. Alexander's family, didn't you?
Again, argumentative, out of his way.
I made contact, yes.
Well, do you know who Mumums is?
Yes.
What is Mumums' name?
Norma Sarby.
And Norma Sarby is Mr. Alexander's grandmother, right?
That's right.
And in fact, that's the person who raised Mr. Alexander, correct?
I believe so.
Well, when you say you believe so, it sounds like you don't know. You did have a relationship with Mr. Alexander, right?
Yes.
And on direct examination, you told us about a time that you went over to his grandmother's house, right?
Yes.
And you and Mr. Alexander talked about his upbringing in the Rubidoux area of Southern California, right?
Briefly.
Pardon? Briefly means you did talk about it, right?
Yes.
And so one of the things that you did was that you actually sent Miss Sarvey irises, right?
Yes.
And you sent her 20 of them, right?
Yes.
And in addition to that, you attached a note, right?
Yes.
And in it, you indicated that she was in your prayers, right?
Yes.
You did this, ma'am. That's a lie, right? When you say that you felt sympathy for her, isn't it?
No, that wasn't a lie.
Oh, so you felt badly for her?
Yes.
You felt badly for her. Is this just sort of a way for you to assuage your guilt? Is that what it is?
That wasn't my thought.
Pardon?
That wasn't my thought.
Well, you say that wasn't your thought, but if you're the person that has done this, she actually received them on June 13th of 2008, didn't she?
I don't know.
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Ma'am, didn't you write in your journal that she received them on June 13th of 2008?
Yes.
So you weren't speculating about that, were you?
I was going off my email confirmation.
Right. So she received these, and you included this message telling her that you were sorry for what had happened, right?
Yes.
That was for your benefit, wasn't it?
No.
Well, it wasn't for your benefit?
No.
Even though you had done it, you still were sending this out, right?
Sending what? The flowers.
The irises,
Yes.
the flowers. That's what we're talking about. And you knew she was an older woman, didn't you?
Yes.
And you knew that she was very tight with Mr. Alexander, right?
Yes.
And so you, as her killer, then, are sending these items to her.
Objection, Your Honors. Related to killing her?
Sustained. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to take the noon recess at this time. Please be back in the jury room by 1:25. Remember the admonition. Have a nice lunch. You are excused. The record will show the jury has left the courtroom. Miss Arias, you may step down. Counsel, 1:25. You may.